My name is Amanda Smith, and I did my research project on evaluating the effects of movement within the classroom. I specifically chose this topic because I think personally and as a parent, um, the expectations for kids these days in a classroom are really high and sometimes outside of their developmental level as far as being able to sit still and engage with the material for the set amount of time that is being required of them. So this is just something I was interested in, of how to incorporate movement and exercise into the school day and what it can do for our kids in their learning. Sorry. So, fitness in the brain. So we know that there's so much research about this in general and what it can affect and how it can affect the whole body and us as an individual. Specifically when looking at it more from an education perspective. Research shows that it improves working memory, it can lengthen the attention span, reduce mental health problems, and improve executive functioning skills in general. And then these are some of the brain areas involved. So I like this visual because it shows different areas of the brain that are affected by different types of exercise. The ones that I mentioned on the last page, specifically being like the executive functioning and the memory control, tend to be the prefrontal cortex. Obviously, there's a lot of areas that are affected, but that's the main one. And you'll see here that's that like complex thinking, reasoning, multitasking, and problem solving. And you can see how essential that is for kids, for those skills to be active in a school day in their classroom in order for learning to be effective and the information to be retained and useful to a kid. So we can see that movement helps children focus, but it can also play a larger role in their education overall. So how is learning specifically impacted? The research that I found that the increase of executive functioning that I mentioned before leads to a decrease of problem behavior, which makes sense if you think about the skills that are involved with executive functioning, that ability to maintain information, to use it, to plan ahead, to kind of check in on oneself, right? And if those skills are being increased and children are more likely to be able to engage in those planning and self, what's the word I'm looking for? Sorry. But just like, kind of like that self check-in, then they're going to have less reason to use behavior, right? When we think about behavior, behavior is a way to get something or a way to communicate. And so if they are more able to focus on the coursework, their need to engage in problem behaviors decreases. And that's what the research showed. Another research study showed that cardiovascular fitness, as that increased, math and reading scores increased as well. And that was more predominant for females, actually, and more that it showed a higher rate of increase in math scores over reading scores, but it was pretty consistent. The other thing that it showed too was that was more common, and the results showed that that was more indicative in middle school and high schoolers. So that cardiovascular fitness was more important in those math and reading scores for the older students, not necessarily elementary students. And then increase in movement throughout the day leads to a general overall increase of cognitive abilities, which makes sense, right? If we're increasing that blood flow, that oxygen to the brain, if we're breaking up our learning, research shows that you can only hold so many things in working memory at one time. So if we're giving breaks, if we're giving time to move, to play at recess, to learn more of those social communication pieces at the same time, it's giving our brain little academic breaks. And maybe even giving us the chance to utilize that information in functional ways when it's still within that working memory, moving it over to that long-term storage for retrieval later, so that those cognitive abilities in an academic setting would be increased. Classroom implementation. So there's a lot of ways to do this, and I think one of the things that has been a common conversation recently is just the decrease in PE and the arts generally, but specifically the movement piece in the PE, the physical education. And I think we've seen that as the physical education decreased, problem behaviors in other areas that were maladaptive increased. So there's been more of a push to get those PE hours in, whether it's with the education teacher or a physical education teacher. But one of the ways that we can have teachers implement more movement and fitness into their classroom is to educate them about the positive academic effects of movement and fitness. So research shows that when teachers have been gone through a training, they have been educated about the importance of it, they're more likely to have positive emotions about it and more willing to try it. Whether or not they're actually implementing it, it shows that they're more likely to have positive emotions around it. So that's one of the ways. Let them know why it's important and how it can affect their students in a positive way academically. Another thing is to educate students on the importance of eating well and exercising. We have a really great opportunity to set up some life habits in these young kids. And a lot of kids may get this information from home. They may have parents that are feeding it to them or good role models for why to engage in outdoor activities and get exercise, but they also may not. So they're going to rely on their classroom teachers, their physical education teachers, their school site to provide that information. And again, set up those healthy habits, which we'll see will affect their math and reading scores later. Gain support from districts and school sites to encourage a top-down approach to implementation. So I think a lot of teachers are going to be more apt to include movement breaks and find ways to add fitness to their day if their school site and their districts are saying, yes, that's a good thing to do. Yes, you should be doing that. As opposed to trying to fight between like, well, all this time should be academic based and we got all these test scores to get. It needs to be a team approach. And I think teachers are going to be more successful and more willing to try it if it's kind of just the way things are being done. And it may be so abnormal for a teacher, so uncomfortable for a teacher because maybe they don't engage in those behaviors themselves. But if every other teacher is doing it, they're going to find ways to try it as well, most likely. Another way is to utilize research-based programs to support the integration into the classroom. So there's a lot of them. There's like the is it called Move 10, and there's Go Noodle, and there's a bunch of different ones that are specifically created for class instruction. And they're usually short, they're usually sometimes academically based. There's a certain way to implement them that it's easy, functional, fun for the kids, and gets everyone moving. And then incorporate movement into routine actions throughout the school day. So this is one that just gets people moving. So if you want to go to the bathroom, you do walking lunges to get to the bathroom. If you need to sharpen your pencil, you do like bunny hops on the way to sharpen your pencil, or any way that you can encourage kids to move and make it fun, make them willingly engage in it. Another way is just to get up and move around the classroom. So go walk across the room to answer a peer, go check out someone else's work, go look at the wall on the other side of the room. Just in those little things, there's research that says even just increasing walking up to 50 steps per day, or was it 500 steps per day, can really boost cognitive function. So that's another good way of doing it. But there's also just so many others, and it's up to the teachers to find what works for them and the school sites to find what works for them. But it is important that we get kids moving. It is important that we encourage healthy habits from a young age, because there's lifelong benefits of it. It's not just in the classroom, it's not just for kids, it's for everyone lifelong. And I think even as you get older, it becomes more important. So teaching these kids what it is, the foundations of it, and why it's important early on will benefit them and society as a whole throughout their life. Thank you. Here's the resources. And let me know in the Blackboard comments if you have any questions.